This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Evan Grant and David Moore. There's a lot going on this week, all kinds of stuff. So much stuff that it is really making my head feel stuffed with stuff. I can't keep up with all of this. One of the things that just happened as we're taping this is that the Dallas Wings have drafted Paige Bueckers and the very first pick of the draft. This is their first time around as the first pick of the draft. We've had that happen before. The Cowboys have had it happen 3 times. They got in their 3 number 1 overall picks. They got Ed Too Tall Jones, Troy Aikman, and Russell Maryland. That's a pretty good track record there. 1 Hall of Famer, 1 really good player, probably should be a Hall of Famer, and then another very serviceable player. Those 3. In the other first round picks of over the years, they've had what, Evan? Shaking your head?
Oh, I was shaking my head at Twitter, which is something I do about 24 hours a day now.
Okay. David Clyde, the Texas Rangers' only number 1 draft pick. That was a terrible story. Didn't work out well for him or the Rangers, and mostly because of how the Rangers treated him. The Dallas Stars have never had the number 1 overall pick. I think
Mavericks did Aguirre.
Mavericks did with Mark Aguirre, yeah.
It was pretty rare.
That's a pretty good track record when you look at it, really, overall, right? Of the clubs that have drafted number 1 over. I mean, you should be getting a great player, or at least a really good one, with that number 1 overall pick. I'm trying to remember, David, in that draft when the Mavericks took Mark Aguirre, there were some really great players in that draft, weren't there?
Isaiah Thomas, and he didn't want to be here, and so that was a young. And there are questions about whether or not Paige wanted to come to Dallas and would embrace that, or if she would use the leverage as a high profile player to get out of that. That wasn't the case. She was very effusive in her praise last night, and she seemed genuinely appreciative of the initial response, not only from the club but from the fans in the area. Talking about how excited they were, and look, we're going to jump off of this pretty quickly and get into a Mavericks team that is in a play-in situation here, just 10 months removed from playing in the NBA Finals. How things have changed, but in some ways, I think fans, I think Luka's shocking departure actually gins up the excitement a little bit for Paige coming in here. I think it's like, well, we just lost a generational player. Here's someone, she's pretty good. Now, I don't know if she's a generational player. She doesn't have the flair of Caitlin Clark, but she's a very, very good player.
Yeah, this will be interesting to see how this goes over, with the new playing arrangements and where they play and how they play. This is the big chance for the Wings to take off, right?
Well, they've never been on the radar here, right? Let's just be honest. They've never really been on the sports radar, and they haven't. Their accomplishments on the court haven't made an argument for them either. But with a couple of players they already have in place, and now adding her, new coaching staff, there's reason I think to. I think they're certainly going to generate an interest this year that they have never done in this marketplace.
Yeah, there's no question about that. This is a front runner town, and if you're getting a big player, a player with that kind of resume and has that kind of national cachet, then people are at least going to be interested. They will give it a shot here at first. Now, then it will depend on the Wings to pick it up from there.
But what if people identify with her? What if she performs great here and people really like the way she plays? And the other basketball team in town just lost its icon and doesn't have a lot of fan sympathy right now. I would never suggest that the Dallas Wings would overtake the Mavericks, but I think there could be more of a swing than we might think in terms of number of fans that get interested in this.
I think there's an opening there that did not exist 2 months ago for the Wings, with whether or not they got Paige or not. So, yeah, I agree with you completely. It's not going to be. I don't think there are any diehard Mavericks NBA fans saying, I've had it with the Mavericks, so now I'm wings all the way. That's all I'm going to watch. That's an unrealistic, expectation. But the door, or at least the window, is cracked open for a level of interest that this franchise has never had, and a part of it is because of how the Mavericks have mishandled what appeared to be a very good situation for a long time to come.
Yeah, and they're probably just going to keep right on mishandling it for all we can tell. I don't know what's going to happen at this point, but we do know that they are going to be opening here with the Kings on Wednesday night in Sacramento. So we will see how they handle that. That will be, I would expect they won't handle it. They had enough trouble with them when they had Luka. That was always an amazing thing to watch those games with the Kings. It always seems like a better team than than their record is to me. I don't know if that was just because of the way they handle the Mavericks, especially inside. Sabonis does such a great job that I think that they struggle with that a little bit. But this should be, I would expect, a one and done here, and then a lot of introspection about what they're going to do, what they'll do in the draft after that. I certainly don't. You don't get that much of a chance of getting past this first round, do you, David?
Well, no, there's no way. It's just whether they get into the first round. I mean,
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I should have said playing game.
I think there is a chance. I mean, I could see them winning now with Anthony Davis back and Gafford and Lively's played just enough. I could see them potentially getting in, but look, Oklahoma City is just going to manhandle this team if they get in. They're going to get in at 8, and they're not going to do anything. So,
yeah.
The expectations from what they were 2 months ago to now have just been obliterated. And you haven't seen this team together enough to get a feel for if it will be successful the way they envisioned when they made this trade. So, yeah, I just don't think there's a lot of upside or excitement or reason for excitement on this Mavericks team right now.
Yeah, I don't either. Let me ask you this, because this is something that came up obviously a lot. And if you went to any Mavericks games toward the end there, and if you were certainly there the night that Luka made his return with the Lakers, you heard a lot of fans. The referendum is that fire Nico, Joe Nico, fire
And knuckleball just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Fire Nico. Let's look at the situation because as I addressed it the other day in my column, my feeling is that look, obviously I thought it was a bad trade, but we saw for when everybody was healthy for a little, not quite 3/4, it did look pretty good, and there are a lot of people in the NBA who feel like it could be pretty good if everybody's healthy. So David, is it a little much to say to this team, fire Nico at this point? Shouldn't he get at least a chance to go through this next season when everybody's back and everybody's healthy before we pull the ripcord on this thing?
Well, that's an emotional reaction. You still want to fire him over the one move. And that's not going to bring Luka back. You're still left with this team. Who would you put in place that you would feel better about shepherding yourself out of the situation you put yourself in? I mean, look, when you trade Luka Doncic, it doesn't matter who does it or how long they're around. That's a fork in the road for a franchise. They've chosen their path. Now they just have to see how far they can travel down it. Look, this certainly cuts the legs out from under Nico. He has no public support. Now he's in a position where every move, even small moves from here on out, are going to carry greater scrutiny with them. He had a pretty good hit rate before Luka, but then that was just such an ill-conceived move, and the one he made right after that too. With Philadelphia hasn't helped them out at all. So
yeah.
I think he's on. Look, I don't see a scenario where he's not back. Well, you're not going to move on from Nico now unless you've determined that, look, we need to blow this up and move on from Anthony Davis and the whole Anthony Davis, Kyrie Irving model going forward. Let's not wait on it. There's too much ill will. How can we spin out of this? What can we get for Anthony Davis? What kind of package can we put together? But then if you're doing that, you're in essence saying we're rebuilding and kind of starting over here 12 months after you went to the NBA Finals I just don't see that happening at this point. I really don't.
Yeah,
Well, I want to add one thing here. I mean, uh, Kevin wrote a column last week in which he mentioned in the aftermath, that it was time to fire him. And my perspective on this is there are mistakes. GMs make mistakes and they learn from mistakes. But this appears to be a case of professional malpractice. I'm not saying it was intentional malpractice, but it was malpractice. They didn't shop a top 3 player to get the most that they could for him. I have yet to come up with an analyst who has bought whatever the Mavericks line of thinking was. And the only way to spin out of this, David, right, is either to double down and say, we in AD, we got our guy, and then you're still losing your fan base because there's no transparency there, or admit you made a horrific mistake. And if you did that, then you've got to get rid of the general manager.
Yeah, I don't think you can massage or nuance your way out of this situation. I think you're right. It's either, look, we're all in, we're too far down this fork in the road, we're going this way, you guys will see it'll work. Or you say, okay, my bad, we understand, let's go about it differently, let's start over right now. And to me, that's even less attractive than keeping Anthony Davis here and going forward. So I just think once that catastrophic decision was made, I just don't see them backing off of that when injuries really did impact the ability of whether or not this would work.
Yeah, I think the last move here, and this was brought up last week, is the one of the courses they could take would be to trade for Kevin Durant. I don't think at this point, first of all, that they would have enough to get from the Suns. Although, maybe the Suns would be selling low, but I don't know why they wouldn't go to the Rockets or to Oklahoma City, which both clubs have a lot more resources to offer in the way of draft picks, and that's what everybody wants if you're going to do something like that. And the Mavericks just don't have any, which was another fault of that trade, right? They only got 1 draft pick from the Lakers in that deal. They should have got more to protect themselves.
Yeah, they didn't get a lot of capital moving forward for this.
No. So, really, of course, the knee-jerk reaction is always to fire somebody, right?
Sure.
And then what you have to ask is, well, then what?
And who do you replace them with?
Who do you replace him with? Who do you trust on this? Is Patrick Dumont going to hire another GM? I mean, unless he appoints Mark Cuban to do it, and Mark Cuban's the guy who hired, Nico Harrison. So, the guy who's done the most damage to the franchise, maybe in its history. And up to that point, he was doing a great job. So,
it's back to Evan's point. I mean, if it's organizational malfeasance, what does removing one person from that do? You still have Dumont and the structure at the top. You still have the general manager position. You have Jason Kidd, who certainly had a say in this. I mean, how far down do you go, and how do you reshape it?
Well, shouldn't it be Rick Welt's responsibility at this point to hire a general manager?
Well, that's where
it's he only handle the business side. He's only on the business side.
He's business, but he's been in that position before. I mean, I would imagine if Dumont made a move with Nico Harris, Rick Welts would be the guy who would bring in the next general manager. Yes.
Yeah. I don't, to Kevin's point, I don't trust Patrick Dumont to make any basketball decisions.
No.
Rick Welts is very respected in this league, and he was an addendum on this. He had nothing to do with this. He came in late. He was brought in strictly for the arena and to move and get that deal done. But he does have expertise in running a team.
Well, the thing about that Rick Welts brings you is the fact that he's so well respected around the league. And Rick, my impression of him, I don't know him at all, but my impression from reading about him and knowing about him over the years is that he's got a low ego guy who would seek out other people to say, what do you think we should do here? And I think he would get a lot of, I would certainly trust him far more than Patrick Dumont.
He builds consensus and listens and then makes decisions.
Yes. So I think that, if they were to go that route, that's probably what would happen. But you're essentially starting all over again, because I'm sure Mark Cuban would clamor to get back in on the deal and try to make a case with
it's not happening. But yes,
I don't think that's happening. And certainly you don't see that now, because I think that's why Mark didn't say anything for what a few weeks. Remember, he said nothing, and now all of a sudden it leaks out every chance he gets about yeah, this was a bad move.
He's distancing himself from it at every opportunity now. And, well, I thought they were going to listen to me. They don't listen to me anymore.
Yeah, I think that was the evidence right there of he thought he still had a chance to pull this thing out. It became clear to him that he can't do that he has no say, that Patrick's not going to give him any more say, and it's all over. And so now he's going to go out and try to make it look like, yeah, I didn't have anything to do with this.
And the terms of that were very clear in the contract and the structure and the selling of the team. Nothing caught Mark by surprise in this contractually.
Yeah, well,
he gives a different impression, but it did not.
He certainly does give a different impression of that. Yeah, especially when he said he thought he was still going to be the governor.
Yeah.
So it's a mess for the Mavericks at this point. I think personally that Nico has to just double down here. Because especially it'd be one thing if Kyrie Irving were coming back healthy next season to start the season. You don't have any idea what he's going to be like, when he comes back. Because he's in his 30s now. This is a major injury. How long is it going to take him to get back to normal? Here's a guy that relies on his quickness, his burst. That's his whole game, So that's going to be really something to see what happens there. I don't know I don't think they can get Kevin Durant. I don't think they have enough resources to outbid the other contenders for that. But they're going to have to do something else, I think, to keep going on that, because I don't think there's enough there as is. This is a very front court heavy team without Kyrie Irving, right? And the problem with that is to me, that's the difference between, you can talk about Anthony Davis being a top 75 all-time player and Luka Doncic, but Luka Doncic has got the ball in his hands. And in my mind, in the end, I'd rather have the guy who has the ball in his hands than the guy who has to wait for somebody to get it to him. All right,
they need another explosive perimeter player. And going back to what you said about doubling down, I believe we live in a time where doubling down is the preferred strategic approach to every situation.
Pretty much, yes, you're right. Pretty much, that's right. That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, there does seem to be something inherently. We can't say we're wrong. We made a mistake. Can't say that.
All right, we're going to move over now and talk a little bit about I guess is the Rangers. Is that what we had next on our itinerary? I've lost my itinerary. That sounds right to me.
Yes, they're doubling down on their offense, Kevin.
They're doubling down. They like to double down. They like to hit a double. Can anyone on this team put the ball in play? That would be my question about these Rangers. Evan, it's awfully early, right, to be pulling the plug on things. But one of the things that Chris Young talked about was that he was not going to tolerate a slow start. Now, it depends on what you consider a slow start. I mean, this is slow. There's no question about that. How long do you give these Rangers before Chris maybe starts to get a little antsy?
Well, listen, I will say this on Sunday, right? Bruce Bochy's tone changed from "we will hit" to "we've got to start hitting." And I still think 2 weeks and 10% of the season in is a little bit early for anybody to be panicking. Check back with them at the end of April, but this team didn't hit last year, and it hasn't hit to start the season. So I understand the level of concern. My perspective here is, you went out and you brought in two guys in particular, and Jake Berger and Jock Peterson, to help this offense, and there was thought behind it, and that they did things well. They haven't hit to start the year. I would say that the Rangers had a good thought process here. They made sense with what they were doing. Now they've got to let these guys play. They've got to let this team get its legs, and they've got to see what they've got. And you don't do that in, 10% of the game. So you're essentially saying that you'd make wholesale changes in the Cowboys season after one game. And I know fans would probably do that, but I don't think you can afford to do that in baseball. And to the other point is, what changes are they going to make? Are they going to bring up Evan Carter? He's played in half of Round Rock's games, and he's hitting 140. Alejandro Ozuna was the buzz of camp, but he's hitting under 200 at AA. I don't see what the big changes are that they would be able to make. They got this team. They put it together. They're 9-7, despite the fact that the offense has got a 208 batting average. I think they've got to just give this team at least 100 at bats, 150 at bats apiece, to see if these guys can get out of it. I'll say this, Kevin, for one example, Jock Peterson is 3 at-bats short of his worst offer in his career. He went 0 for 29 for the Dodgers, or 0 for 29 in 2019. He's 0 for 26 right now. His OPS at the end of 2019, 874. So I don't think that these first 2 weeks are necessarily indicative of where this team is.
Oh, certainly not. But you can see if you look back at after the season and if it never kicked in, you'd say, well, look at Jock Peterson. He's in his early 30s. He's clearly not in the greatest shape of anybody who's ever played the game. And that this was his body was going to start breaking down a little earlier than other people's, and that's why he didn't. He lost a little bit. I'm not saying he can't bounce back. I'm not saying that any of these guys can't. I think what's encouraging is the fact that some of the guys who had the worst season, like Jonah Heim, he's doing great. Right? If you'd have thought
Adolis Garcia's approach has been much better. This, for me, is the thing that I look at. The guys who were awful last year, Heim and Garcia, and I don't mean that in a personal way. They just had really bad offensive seasons. These guys have gotten off to improved starts in every fashion. And so, do I think Corey Seager is going to hit 220 all season? No. Am I a little bit concerned about Marcus Semien potentially being in a decline? Yeah, but I also know he's had a career full of slow Aprils and come out of them. I just think that April is all about like discovering your club. And in May or in June, that's when you start massaging it a little bit.
Let me ask you this, and this is kind of veering off of the path of the offense that we've been on, but does it disturb you that Kumar Rocker shakes off pitches so much? I bet he shakes off more pitches than the rest of the staff combined.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk to Heim on Sunday morning about that, but he did shake off a lot, and his pitch mix was very curious on Saturday. That he went to the curveball very heavily and kind of got away from his slider entirely, and that's kind of a reverse of who he's been. And I get the impression that the Rangers weren't quite sure why he did that. And the best answer I could give you is this: I think Kumar has a very strong belief that he knows himself and knows what he does best. And that will serve him well in his career. But I think there's also times you've got to learn where you've got to trust the veterans and the coaching staff around you too. It was a curious night for him in the way he was pitching. And I don't think the problem so much was whether it was his curveball or his slider, but once again, it was too many fastballs over the heart of the plate. And when you do that, it doesn't really matter what your second pitch is. You're in a heap of trouble from the start.
Yeah, it just seems a little counterintuitive to what baseball is now, right? It's basically, we're not flying by the seat of our pants anymore. Everything has a thought process here, and we've got the numbers to back it up, and so you have to go along with that. And I'm not saying that I'm against Kumar. If he feels like this is something he doesn't want to throw, then it's something he doesn't want to throw if he doesn't have confidence in it. But it is interesting, and I don't know. I've only talked to him or interviewed him once or twice, and he seems like a nice guy. But he has seemed a little reserved, maybe. And I guess what I'm asking is, what's your impression of him and what he thinks about what he wants to do, and how, I guess, strong-willed is he?
I mean, that is my impression, is that, for lack of a better term, there's a degree of DGAF, don't give a F, about, what others think or what others are going to impart on him. He has confidence in his stuff, and that's a really important asset to have. But I also think that, just like anything, when you go too far to the extreme on one, it stops being an asset and it can become a liability. And so I think that there's going to be some recalibrating of what the line is for Kumar on when he's got to trust his guys and believe that the stuff that he has is good enough to play if those guys are putting their fingers down, or Mike Maddox is saying this will work for you. And then there's going to be some times when the Rangers have to understand this guy is pretty in tune and throws his pitches with conviction, and they're going to have to live sometimes with maybe the stuff isn't as good as they would like to see it, but I know that Kamar can pitch. And when I say pitch, I'm talking about, I think he's got good pitchability. I think he's got the ability to work with what he's got. But remember, Kevin, this guy's got less than 100 innings of professional experience. And I think that some of that is showing up a little bit. Not everybody can be Paul Skeens. Nobody can be Paul Skeens, in fact. And I do think we're seeing a little bit of that. There's some refinement that still needs to go on there.
Yeah.
And you shake it off, you have to be successful, or you lose the right to continue to shake off at that level. And that's what it is.
Or you become Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Oh,
It wasn't.
Thank you, Evan, for
Just
that
set
one.
him up for that.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to make sure I continued to hit all the beats with our young listeners out there. Hi, kids.
Yeah, there you go. Good job. All right, before we get out of the Rangers segment, I do want to ask about one more thing. This is kind of like a Jimmy Johnson kind of thing to me. If you can't do anything about Jake Berger or Jock Peterson really at this point, you don't have a viable replacement for one of those kind of guys. But you could do something in center field. And certainly Yodi Tavares is not off to a great start either. Is it possible the Rangers could make a move there and at least because they do have some alternatives there if they want.
They had every opportunity this spring. Look, to your point, yeah, I think they could make some changes. And I think, when Wyatt Langford comes back, certainly the possibility of Wyatt playing center field and Josh Smith becoming more of a regular left fielder presents itself. But to that point, they had all spring to basically say, let's take a look at Wyatt in center field and let's give this an opportunity to play out. And they didn't. They felt they needed to look at Carter and Langford more, Carter and Tavares more in center field. But I do think when you're talking about massaging the team, you're wanting to find more and more at bats for Josh Smith. And that's got to come at the expense of somebody. And right now, I would say the most vulnerable player is probably Leody Tavares. And so if the Rangers, the one thing on the one contradiction on the Langford thing is, the Rangers talk about him having a big body, a big blocky body, and that they're worried about injuries in center field or center field being too taxing on a guy. And Langford is out with an oblique muscle right now. So I think there's also reasoning for the Rangers to say, hey, we want to be cautious because the most important thing is we want this guy in the lineup. And navigating that is going to be difficult. But I think it is time, maybe at the end of April, to say, let's take a look at what Wyatt in center and Josh Smith in left would look like.
Yeah, I agree with that. But just for what you said, there's another problem for me is that, first of all, you got Josh Smith in left field. I'm going to assume his range won't be great. And so then you're going to ask for your center fielder to cover even more ground. And if Wyatt's out there doing that and he's straining to cover more ground, then he's opening himself up to more injury possibilities. So it is a conundrum. I don't really know what the best thing to do there is. I think probably I would stick with Wyatt in left field, but you're going to have to find a place for Josh because he is hitting. He is proving that last year wasn't a fluke. So they need all the bats they can get into the lineup.
No, I think come the end of April, if and look, I'm not so sure Leody Tavares is a cold weather player. He was bundled up pretty heavily in Chicago. He was bundled up pretty heavily in Seattle, and maybe that had an impact on him cutting off the ball in Seattle that he didn't cut off. So let's see what he looks like in the warmer weather now that we're out of frigid temperatures. But if he doesn't pick it up, I do think that that's something the Rangers are really going to have to consider is Langford in center. And maybe they talk about Josh Smith in center. Maybe that's the way they go.
Yeah, I think there was that one time when he came in that trade with the Yankees that Josh Smith was talked about it somewhat as
every time you get a utility middle infielder like they did with Michael Young at one point, it's like, oh, maybe he can play center field.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for the Rangers segment of our podcast. We're going to move over and talk about the Cowboys now. Micah Parsons apparently did show up for the voluntary workouts this week, which was a step up over.
Yeah, he's a leader now, Kevin. We can move on. He showed up for the first OTA.
He's a leader.
Move on to another topic.
I think that, Dave, I think what we're going to find is that Micah Parsons is the leader for this generation. Every generation has a different kind of leader, I think, we find, and maybe they're defined a little differently by what they were previous generations.
We've talked about leadership here, but again, it's leaders don't talk about it. It's what they do. Micah's a leader who has talked. And look, I will say he's very self-aware. He knows what his perception of him is in that locker room. But you just can't do things that aren't in your character. And two, you can't just like skip off-season programs and come in and admonish the other guys for what they're not doing. And
Yeah.
look, he's still prepared for the seasons. He's an outstanding player. He's an elite athlete. You can truly have an argument whether or not he's the league's best defender. I believe that. But it's interesting too, and just how leverage for different players is different. Let's go back to last year. CeeDee Lamb's leverage was to not show up for OTAs. This is a guy who loves to practice, practices hard, has really earned the respect of his teammates for how he practices, likes being out there, likes being around the guys. His leverage to get across how serious he was about an extension getting done before the season started was not to go to OTAs and then consequently also miss training camp. Micah, a guy who's only sporadically attended the voluntary off-season program the past 2 years, what is his leverage? His leverage is to actually show up to show how serious he is about getting a deal. And look, Jerry Jones during the league meetings publicly addressed when you're that good, you've got to have a certain level of leadership, and that's what we're looking for from Micah. So this is a negotiating leverage point that plays in Micah Parsons' favor to actually make more than a sporadic appearance at OTAs this year. And I think it's something that helps him with his teammates, and I think it's something that's going to help him get the contract that he wants and deserves.
I got to ask you, David, and I don't know this, but just from watching the whole scene develop, just that whole crazy scene with Jerry Jones when he was saying he didn't even know who the name of Micah's agent was, David Mulligetta.
I talked to him afterwards and pressed him on that point and said, this is just hyperbole. And he said, no, it is not. I would not know him if he walked up to me.
But it doesn't feel like this is the old days with Jerry, and like in the 90s when he made best friends with these guys and they were all going over the head of the head coach to the owner. Doesn't it feel a little bit like I just get the impression Jerry loves Micah and that he just wants to have a relationship with Micah like he had with Deion Sanders and everybody else back in the day?
Oh, I think Jerry is at I'm 82 years old. This is the way I do things, like it or not. And Jerry has never been that way before. I think you've started to see that change here in the last year to year and a half. I think he's much more, no, this is the way we're going about it. Why? Because I say so. Where in the past he felt the need to appease the fan base and at least hear them. He would still do things the way he wanted to do it, right? But he would massage the message. I think now there really is an element of, look, this is who I am. If you're not accepting it by now, I don't know what I can tell you. And so that I think is different. And look, I know people made a big point of, well, how could you not know Muggaletta and you're doing the contract? And look, Stephen is doing the heavy lifting on the details of the contract. This is not Jerry doing it. Jerry approves it. Jerry gives the marching orders. Jerry has the final say on what he will accept on the contract, but it's not him. He's not doing the individual contracts anymore other than signing off on the approach and the final number. So that's all Steven. So the fact that Jerry wouldn't recognize David if he stepped up to him in the meetings is really irrelevant. And remember, all of this got started, because Jerry and Micah had a conversation about a contract where Muggaletta wasn't included. Who initiated the call? Micah Parsons. It wasn't Jerry Jones calling Micah to do a workaround. And you were talking about, I agree with you completely. I think Jerry sees a lot of Deion in Micah, just as far as level of performance, how charismatic he is. Jerry is obviously attracted to that personality type and really enjoys being around that type of person. But I'll say that works two ways too. Micah really cherishes his relationship, from what I can tell, with Jerry Jones. He's constantly talking about the time he spends with Jerry and how much it means to them. And I think both of them got caught up in their relationship a little bit, said, okay, let's sit down, let's work this out. And while they agreed on the broad parameters of a deal and how it was going to work, once then you get to the level of actually making it work and putting pen to paper, and Micah's representation's going, well, wait a minute, the devil's in the details here. You didn't get protection here. This is what this needs to be. We need to do this. And then that initial excitement of the two of them sitting down and going, oh yeah, we're going to make this work, devolves into the reality of actually making it work.
Yeah. Let's move over, David, and talk a little bit about the draft. We're getting really close now. It's just a little over a week away.
Week from Thursday, yeah.
Yes, sir. In all these mock drafts we're seeing now, it's funny how these things move. And, of course, a lot of it had to do with the combine and how people tested. And specifically, I'll talk about Matthew Golden, the wide receiver from Texas, who until he ran that 4.29 40 at the combine, which was the fastest time at the combine, he was a marginal first rounder. At best. And now I guess there's some speculation as to whether he might be the first wide receiver to go, that with Tedoroa McMillan of Arizona being the other candidate probably at this point. If, in one of the latest ESPN mock drafts, I see them having Golden going to Texas. I'm going to the Cowboys. I don't have a problem with that at all. I do think that watching Matthew play for Texas, you never got the impression of the speed being such an element of his game. It wasn't like he was, flying down the field on some kind of fly pattern and they're throwing bombs to him. They didn't. That wasn't their offense, But he did make a lot of really good catches. He ran good routes. He was a very dependable receiver for them. So I guess what I'm saying all this to say, if that's who the Cowboys take at 12, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, sitting at 12, I think there's a chance that Dallas can get the best receiver in the draft, whoever they consider that to be. And it's hard to envision a scenario where more than one wide receiver is off the board at 12. And maybe the receiver who's off the board is not the one that you had rated the highest. See, I think this is a what's your favorite flavor sort of receiver class of the top two or three. I think between Golden, McMillan, and the Ohio State receiver, I don't know that there's. I think those two have probably separated a little bit from
Buka,
Buka, but I think he's right there in the mix too. And Burden's a guy who doesn't practice well, but is an outstanding player on game day. So and I wouldn't completely dismiss him either. Although I think he's more likely late first than right in that the top third, which is where the Cowboys would be.
Yeah, I tell you, I've kind of been sticking to my whole thing that Jahdae Barron, the Texas defensive back, that is the guy I would take. He's
in that range. I mean, he's a player to discuss in that range, no question.
He is, but in a best case world scenario, I think I would take him. But I just don't think there's enough wide receivers to go around. I mean, if I thought that Luther Burden from Missouri would slip to the Cowboys in the second round, well, then for sure.
I don't think he'll be down that low, though. And once those top four receivers are gone, I don't know how much you really upgrade yourself at that position.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas now you don't get your running back in the first or second round, you can still upgrade at that position if you're the Cowboys. And to me, this is part of the discussion point at the Star the rest of this week and leading up to the draft is, okay, these three positions are pretty clearly rated the same, but what is the drop-off if we don't get a receiver in the first, if we don't get a running back in the first, if we don't get a corner in the first? How big is the drop-off until we get back to take another one? And if that is, that also factors into when people are talking about the best available, but, okay, but that's a broad stroke. There's a lot more to the conversation. And if the best available, if the next five after the best available are pretty darn close to your score, well, you go off your board a bit. That helps you make the determination to go to another position. And that's what they're working through now. And those are very complex conversations at 12 because you're going to have that, because they're going to be sitting there. It's like, Well, do we take the best receiver in the draft? My belief is the best running back in the draft will be gone by then. Or do you take, well, look, this is the last really good pass rusher. Do we take him here? So those are the sort of discussions they're having there now.
Yeah, I got to tell you, unless I'm getting Ashton Jenny, I'm waiting till the third
Wait
round.
until the second or third to get.
Yeah,
we know who
third
you
probably, because I just don't know what you're going to get there in the second round, after the second round at that position. So
yeah,
we'll see. All right, we're going to move over to our last segment here and talk a little bit about the Masters. Rory McIlroy comes back to complete the career Grand Slam and join 5 other players. Only 6 players have ever won all 4 majors, and he took the longest to do it. The other 3 was really interesting. I thought we had a note about that in the paper the other day. Most of them, I guess all of them, completed the Grand Slam between their 3rd and 4th wins was anywhere from 1 to 3 years.
Once they got in that position, the whole strike while the iron is hot, which is
and Rory did not
there's
do
something
that.
to be said about the way Rory did it, and not just that it was 11 years since he won his last major and came back and did this, because he is only 35, but the way he did it on that back 9, that was I've rarely seen a major golf tournament play out that way. And I know people are saying, "Oh, here Rory goes again." He just hit a few bad shots. I mean, and it just happened every time he did, someone else did something right at that moment. But he kept coming back. Talk about the perseverance after 11 years to survive that back 9, which again, I don't think this isn't a Vandervelde or something where you just completely wheels come off, or Spieth that year in the Masters. This it wasn't a total implosion like that. It was just, oh, boy, you miss one shot here, and suddenly what was looked like a pretty strong 3-stroke lead is suddenly down to 1, and now 4 guys you weren't even talking about on the front 9 are now back in contention with playing incredible golf. So it was quite a spectacle. I thought the final 9 holes.
They're all over the place in that one. We were in our family. We were watching it, and my oldest son is a pretty good golfer, and I was betting him about Scheffler and how close he was going to come. And Scotty came back and was pretty much in it. If anybody else had fallen apart a little bit more, if he'd have gotten a few shots to fall, he'd have been right in the mix too. I did think that he looked more rattled at this Masters than I've seen him in any major golf tournament in the last couple of years. And that's always been Scotty's game, is to remain so cool and unflappable.
And then when he was out of it, basically he got to 17 with a chance to come back and tie.
I know.
It was just wild.
And
Bryson DeChambeau just never. But again, I thought Bryson played his way out of it, but then he hit just enough good shots late to keep himself in it.
Yeah, and the fact afterwards where he said that he and Roy didn't speak after basically then their whole round.
The whole round, yeah. And he said, "Well, you didn't even talk to me." And then the person asking the question said, "Well, did you try to talk to him?" And it's like, well, he wanted to talk to him. He wasn't doing any good. So you weren't putting a lot of effort in either. Both of them enjoy kind of picking at each other here.
Yes, they do. That has a lot to do with the live golf stuff, of course, and all of that, and how that's developed over the last couple of years. But that was a lot of fun to watch that ending. I will say that. I did feel like that he was going to do that, come back in the end. Although, I felt like the first time he was on 18, on Sunday, I thought, oh, he just looks so tight on that putt. It's like this is not a difficult putt right here, and he just looked like he didn't even want to move. I thought, I think I could take that putt for you if you'd like me to. I think I can.
Well, again, and that's the thing. That's where I talk about not falling apart. He had that putt to win it without going to the extra hole. You did not, missed it left, didn't even give it a chance. And then when he hit that spectacular shot after he stumbled a bit into, I guess, 15 it was, where he had like about a 5-foot putt for an eagle, and he misses that. So suddenly, you talk about the momentum of golf. He got a birdie, picked up a stroke, and you're like, oh boy, he blew a chance.
Yes.
So even when he was, like I said, he was getting birdies and people felt he was blowing a chance. It wasn't like he was like, dropping it into Ray's Creek a couple times in a hole.
But it was an entertaining Sunday. I will say that. That was a lot of fun to watch. So we'll
and Scheffler's show too. He's just going to. He didn't play well, but he's to still hang in there and be there. He just plays that course so well. I don't think we've seen his end of mastery at the Masters for Scheffler.
Was that supposed to be a little pun there? Mastery at the Masters?
Well, I was trying to get a rise out of Evan, but he's just he's bracing for his rodeo goat experience.
I checked out.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks for just checking out on this podcast. We're hoping that our listeners haven't checked out yet.
They haven't, because they just come in to listen for me, and so if I don't say anything, it just gets them more attentive because they're waiting for me to jump in.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what it is.
Are you buying that?
Yeah,
no.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, no, I do have to head over, so I need to beg out here.
Well, we're all out of here. This has been enough for us. We packaged as much.
Certainly
of this
been
stuff
enough for
as
the listener.
For we can. I think we covered like 12 or 15 subjects in this one podcast. This is the most economical podcast we've ever done. We were really efficient getting all this stuff in here. It's kind of amazing. So we'll come back and do it again next week.
So me not speaking helped the efficiency.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. This was my favorite podcast so far. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.